So today we're going to be taking a look at assembling a room design and understanding how we can modify a empty room into adding in furniture, changing the color of walls to make it your own customized space. To start out, I have layer one, which is my background image. This is a PNG image, so you can see the gray and white boxes in the windows. This will allow us to be able to place a landscape into the background later on. To start building out, we're going to take a look at selecting out our baseboards, the ground. I'm going to go over left side navigation, and having gone through this, the quick selection tool is actually probably the best option. There is a little issue in which it will not select a small little area in the corner, but we can zoom in closer to this area. And if I want to add in the selection, unfortunately, if I start to drag into this space, it's going to end up selecting a baseboard. I can always hit Command or Control Z to undo, but I can switch over to my polygon lasso tool. I'm going to click a point by, I'm going to hold down Shift, make sure to hold down Shift so that you can add in the selection. I'm going to draw around the area in which I want to add in. And when I get back to where I started, we can see that it adds into that selection itself. I can zoom out, and taking a look at the space, I have the floor selected up to where it runs into the molding and into the curtain. I'm going to look to now colorize this. To colorize this, we're going to be using our adjustments panel. The adjustments panel is located over on the right side navigation. I click on the adjustments panel, and I can look for the first icon, second row. This is the hue and saturation, and this is going to create a layer mask that sits on top of our background image. To colorize this image, if I take a look at the settings in the what is now the properties panel, it shows us a hue, saturation, and lightness. If I try to adjust this, nothing's going to happen. Unfortunately, we have to make sure that we click on colorize to allow it to place in a color over top of this area. And it's only affecting the live area, the white area that we can see in this layer mask, whereas everything else is blocked out, hidden from view. So if I want to adjust this color, if I want to get more of a wooden color, I'm going to adjust in between red and yellow, get an orange area. If I want to push up the saturation and get more vibrant, but if I want something a little bit more realistic, I'm going to probably drop my lightness down to get more of a wood grain color. If I feel like it's too bright or vivid, I can always drop down the saturation again, but I still want to be able to see the wood panels on the ground, so make sure not to drag your lightness too dark or too light. But this gives me a good sense of perspective and using these wood panels to help identify perspective when we start placing in furniture or rugs or any other additional pieces. Once we have our floor color, now we're going to look to color our walls. I'm going to go back over to the polygon lasso tool, and I'm going to zoom in because we want to look to select out the wall area, not including the molding. Over towards where the molding meets the wall, I'm going to click a point, follow along the molding, now I'm just going to follow along with the shape of the curtain up to where it runs into the molding. There's a shadow underneath of the window based off the ledge, but I can trace around again, just going up. I want to make sure to stop where it runs into the curtain again, click a point, and again keep going up through the design. Finally, I want to get back to where I started and close up the shape, and now I can just see the dotted lines appearing around the area that I want to colorize. So again, we're going to go back up to the adjustments panel. We don't want to affect the properties panel that we're currently in. This will only be affecting the floor itself. So just understand that we need to create a new adjustments panel just for our walls. I'm going to add a new hue and saturation. We can see that layer now created in the layers panel. As you start to add in more layers, you may want to start renaming the layers as well. So I have wall color and floor color. But with our wall color, in my properties panel, I'm going to again choose colorize. And we start out with this light pink. It's just the default color that was put in there. But I can adjust the hue to find another tone that I'm satisfied with, something that I want to make it more of my personal taste. Once I find a color that I like, I can also adjust for more vibrance. We get something more vivid or something lighter. Or I can, again, drop the lightness or push the lightness up. Be careful not to push the lightness too high that we lose the shadows of the walls. This allows us to maintain that three-dimensionality and something more realistic overall. So I'm going to go with a darker greenish blue color. Now that I have these, now we're going to look to start placing in objects. Like we talked about before, there are gray and white boxes in the background inside the windows. I'm going to look to place an image inside of this area. So I want to place in an image. I'm going to go File, Place Embedded. And I can choose out my landscape picture. Click Place. I can scale this up. And what I really want to do is make sure that it covers up over top of the windows. I can always adjust the size of it, but I'm going to look to relocate the landscape layer underneath of layer 1. I can click and drag it downward. And from here, I can get into moving it using the Move tool, adjusting location. If I want to see more water or more sky, it's up to me to kind of figure out what location I like the best. But I got some water, sky, mountains. It all works for my design. Now I can look to start building out and adding in pieces into the room. I'm going to start by adding in a rug. Adding the rug gives us a sense of what perspective should really look like using the wooden panels on the floor. Again, I'm going to go File, Place Embedded. Choose out my rug image. Right now, just understand that I am seeing the rug inside the window area. It's just because we did not move up to the top layer. I want to look to move the rug up to above all the rest of our layers so we can be able to edit. I picked an ugly rug, so you can find something, your own style, something that's a lot nicer or more elegant to what you want. But if I want to get into modifying the rug, I can hit Command or Control T. This will allow me to get into rotating or scaling. I do recommend that when you do rotate, hold down Shift, so that maintains it's going to rotate in 15 degrees segments. If you don't do it, it's a little bit hard to get that perfect 90-degree angle unless you're holding down Shift. So I'm going to slide it down, leaving a little bit of room of the wooden panels on the bottom. And I'm going to also grab the top middle to scale it down so that I'm leaving a little bit room of the wooden panels on the top. Now that I have this, I want to take advantage of using these lines of the wood panels. This will give me an indication of what the perspective should look like to get the correct layout as it's on the floor. If I want to modify this, I'm going to right click with the Control T, or once I've gone into the transform, I'm going to click on Distort. The reason why I don't get into perspective is because it is very limiting. But if I hold down Shift and start to move with the Distort, it allows me to affect the object. And again, the reason why I'm using this wood panel or this floor, it gives me an indication of where I want my rug to end. I can get the points to line up exactly where I want, meeting right on the cusp of this wood panel. And then it just follows along this entire line of the wood panel over on the bottom right. Then I'm going to look to click and drag the bottom left corner outward. And if you end up distorting or moving pieces, it can change the entire look and layout. You want to make sure that your top part of the rug and bottom parts of the rug are parallel, that they would never run into each other. And they're also completely horizontal. They're not going to be on an angle. They're going to fit to the space that we have. So when we get into a more customized room with actual size that we can fit objects, you want to be able to fit it to the line panels. Even if it doesn't necessarily make sense, when you see the rug following those lines on the wooden panels, it's going to fit to the correct perspective. Now that I have the rug in place, I can hit Enter to place it. And you can see it's just sitting well into this overall space. If I do try to shrink it down, I am going to have to make adjustments and grab every corner to modify it to a different perspective. So just use the lines on the floor, trust the angle and perspective to be right as long as you're following along with the wood panels. Now I'm going to look to add in some design elements. I go to File, and I'm going to go up to Place Embedded, and I'm going to choose out the poster image, very popular image of Bob Dylan. I'm going to look to scale this down to fit better to the wall. I'm leaving room over to the right because this is where we're eventually going to put a TV and stand. But for the image of Bob Dylan, I'm going to scale it down enough, and we want to start thinking about how to get perspective. This is right now a poster, so we wouldn't necessarily see a shadow. But if I wanted to make this a picture frame, if I wanted to create some dimension that this stands out off the wall, I'm going to go over to my layers panel, and we can always go into adding in our own picture frame and building it out ourselves. But just understand that you can also use the effects and tools of Photoshop to help build out your own type of picture frame. So with my poster layer selected, I'm going to go down to FX. I'm going to go down to Stroke. With Stroke, my current background color is a white background. I'm going to change this to a gradient. With a gradient, we see this transfer from black to white, but doesn't really fit a very frame-looking design. I can keep the size where it's at 18 pixels, and I want to make sure that my position is set on the outside. Opacity can stay at 100, but my gradient right now I'm just not satisfied with, and there are plenty of options that you can choose from within the settings. So if I wanted to get more of a neutral wooden color, I go into neutrals. Or if you wanted to get more of a silver type of frame, I can go into grays. It's all kind of for you to decide what looks best or what you're trying to go for the design. If I wanted to modify this gradient, I can always click on the gradient itself. And if I want to get this more metallic look, I may want to start out with a couple darker colors, grays. And I can add in anchor points along this gradient bar. So because I selected this dark gray, if I click, I'm going to add in multiple variations of this dark gray along this bar. But what I'm going to do is change this up by adding in a couple variations of light and gray, kind of combining to create a shine. So if I wanted to lighten up this color, or lighten up an area of gray, I can click on that specific gray color, double click on it, and bring into a lighter variation. But now you can see that it's a lot more shine-like. And if I want to change the angle, I can affect how that gradient is going to travel, or I can modify the scale to make it more or less. Once I have this frame, I'm going to also look to put in a drop shadow. The drop shadow will help create the sense that there is light coming from this window. So if I want to have the light coming from the window, the light would be hitting the left side and the shadow would be casting off to the right. So I'm going to go over back into my drop shadow and adjust the location, changing my angle over to the left side. About 160 should be good. And I may want to drop the opacity if I feel like it's too strong or creating too much of a shadow. But my spread doesn't need to be high. My size is really what's going to affect and give us a sense of where the shadow is coming from. And I can modify my distance if I want it further away. Obviously, we want to have a poster or picture off the wall, so it's not going to be far off the design. But it's understand we're looking for just something subtle that looks realistic, that helps create dimension, so it's not just a flat object at all times. So once we have a stroke and we have a drop shadow, I'm going to click OK. Now that we have a poster on the wall, now we can start thinking about other pieces of furniture, or larger pieces of furniture. So we're going to get into adding in a TV stand, and you have to really think about the space of how it's going to fit. I could attempt to find an image, and I did provide for this assignment a number of different resources that you can look at. But if I go into File, Place Embedded, what I'm going to take a look at first is the TV stand angle version. And when I do place this, I did mess up the design purposely so that you could not use this image for your own project. But for the demonstration, what we're looking to do is take out this white area so that we're only revealing our design. I can place in the image, but what we're going to use is the Magic Wand tool over on the left side navigation for tool, and click on the white outside of the object. This selects everything on the white. It does a good job of recognizing the separation between our black stand and TV. Once I have this area selected, we're going to add a layer mask. And because I added a layer mask with the white area selected, it left the white. You could always invert the selection prior to, but I'm going to actually just do the invert now, in which I can hit Command I or Control I to invert the selection so we're only seeing the TV stand and the TV. The problem with this angle is that it's not perfect to what we're looking for. If I wanted to place this along the edge of this rug, it doesn't fit to that necessarily angle. So we may have to modify an image to fit it better to a space. And even though this does have an angle, it's not necessarily the best image to possibly work with. So you may want to consider finding a flat variation of a TV, and we'll take a look at that in a moment. But if I did want to try salvaging this image, I'm going to right click or hit Command or Control T, then right click, and I get into distorting it from here, in which if I hold down Shift while scaling it down, I can get this angle of the TV to be more accurate to what I'm looking for. The problem is then it starts to look a little bit squished, but I still do have the perspective that I'm looking for on the side of the object. So just be careful to find images that work for space. They should look realistic when they're all done, not squished. So if I don't like this image overall, I can even place it just to see how it overall looks. But if I'm not satisfied with the look, I'm just going to hide this layer for a moment. And we're going to go back up to File, Place Embedded. This time I'm going to get the couch front, the TV stand front, and place. And just as we did before, we're going to get into selecting and separating the white from the TV. I can go over to the Magic Wand tool, click on the white background. I'm going to hold down Shift to select out the additional white areas. I can see a little plus sign up here. I'm going to move the Magic Wand white tip to click in those areas and add them to the selections. Now that I have those areas all selected out, again, if I do want to do an invert on the object, I can do Command Shift I. It inverts the selection, so I'm selected on the TV now. And when I add a layer mask, it leaves us with the TV without the white background. So just again, going through the process, if I wanted to invert my selection, right now it's currently selected on the white. I'm going to hit Command or Control Shift I. Now it's selected on the TV, and now I can add a layer mask, leaving the TV from the object. And again, I've modified the image. I didn't want you to be able to use this image necessarily for the project. But I'm going to scale this down and look to place this on the back wall. It fits very well back here where I have the poster kind of sitting over top of the corner. But you can always get into scaling the object if you feel like it's not to the right proportions that you're looking for. But now that I have the poster where it's or the TV where I want, now we have to look to place in the shadow. And unlike the shadow that we put on the poster, the TV needs two separate shadows. One's going to be for the TV casting behind, just as we saw with the poster. But we also need to add the three-dimensionality that we'll be seeing on the ground from the TV stand. TV stand has some weight, has some depth, so we need to show that depth. So we're going to first look to use the polygon lasso tool to draw out our area where we want our shadow. Just like we did with the poster, I'm going to have the shadow casting down and a little bit to the right. So I'm going to look to draw out a rectangle that's going to fit down and to the right of our TV. And the reason why I went underneath, again, is just getting the underneath section. A shadow would be casting from that TV. But instead of just filling this in, we're going to look to draw the drop shadow that's going to sit underneath of the TV stand as well. For the TV stand, I'm going to use these bottom corners to give me an indication of where my shadow is necessarily going to end. I can start down a little bit lower and make sure that you're holding down Shift to add in the selection. I'm going to look to draw a cross over to the other bottom corner. Now I'm going to go into the actual area of the object, and I'm drawing more of a trapezoid shape that's going to allow me to create some depth from our shadow. If you need to get back to where you started and you can't find the location where you started, just double click and it'll automatically connect to where your last starting point was. But before I can look to add this shadow in, I need to create a new layer, and we're going to call this TV shadow. With the TV shadow, we're going to look to fill this in with black. I can go up to Edit at the top navigation, down to Fill, change the content aware to black, and click OK. Then I'm going to move the TV shadow underneath of my TV stand. But the most important step that you have to make sure to do is deselect. Command or Control D to get rid of the dotted lines. If you don't get rid of the dotted lines, you're going to have a very sharp, unrealistic shadow. But if you get rid of the lines, now we can go up to Filter, Blur, and Gaussian Blur. With Gaussian Blur, I can adjust the distance of the radius to something more where I feel like it's realistic. I'm going to push it up to about 12. And yes, the shadows are very strong, but we're going to see how we can blend this into our areas to make it look a lot more realistic. So the shadow is very strong right now. To adjust this, what we're going to do is go over to our normal blend mode section. Right in the top of the layers panel, I'm going to click on the drop down. And if I go through the different options, I can see how the shadows might be affected. But having done this several times before, I know that the most likely shadow that's going to look realistic is likely going to be my soft or hard light. With hard light here, it comes out very too strong. So I'm going to change this over to soft light. And it looks good over behind the TV, but not necessarily strong enough on the bottom. So what I'm going to do is duplicate the shadow. I can right click and duplicate layer. And now I get a shadow that's a lot better down on the bottom, but it's a little bit strong over on the top. So I may want to consider just simply using the rectangle marquee tool. I'm just going to delete out the top portion of the shadow. I can simply hit backspace and it cuts it out, giving us a more realistic shadow like we originally started. And now I have the shadow casting underneath of the TV stand as well. If I feel like the TV stand is too strong, if I need to drop it down, I could always move the opacity, reduce it down to get something a little bit more realistic. But it's all really about the user preference and what you think looks best and meets the requirements. So now that we have a TV stand, now we want to get a couch in here. If I wanted to look at, say, a front view couch or get a couch that is facing towards us, I go to File, Place Embedded. Again, I provided this image already. So I go to Couch Front and Place. I can scale this up and just, again, remember that your layers currently are showing that this is behind your TV shadow or your TV stand. So make sure to move it up. And very often we get these watermark images. Be careful to find images that do not have watermarks that are going to ruin your overall look and feel. But if I do want to keep this image, we could spend a lot of time just cutting out a watermark, but that will be for another assignment. Instead, what we're going to look to do is use the object selection. The object select is located in the same place as the magic wand. If I click and hold, I can click and drag over top the image, or you can just click on the image itself. But with the object select, it does a good job of recognizing the entire object. Now I can add a layer mask, and now I have my couch to work with. I could get into tweaking or modifying little elements, make it cleaner, but there's a big issue with this image. The problem is that it's facing the wrong way. The couch should be facing the back wall. And as much as you want to try, I could try going into distort, I could try going into changing and rotating the image. No matter what you do, you're going to end up with the front of the couch. Don't think that you're going to magically provide the back of a couch to make it more visible. It does not work that way. If it's not in the actual picture, you're not going to be able to produce an image that magically appears as the correct dimension. So if you want to find the back of a couch, Google back of the couch or go searching for an image of the back of the couch and it'll fit better to your space. So as much as I may want this, it just doesn't work for having it in this area. If I wanted to place it off to the side, again, it also has a problem of not showing perspective and depth. If I try to make it on an angle, you can see that it's just not fitting to what I want for a couch. Nobody's going to be able to sit on this thing. So if we want to have this image, as much as I try to place it, it's still going to look unrealistic. So I'm going to hide this image for now, and we're going to go back up to File, Place Embedded. And for our last image, we're going to take a look at the couch angle. I can click Place. And again, a watermark is just another issue that we have to deal with all the time. But we want to look to select outer couch. I can use the object select again, click and drag over top of the area. And it may sometimes select this Shutterstock down the bottom. We can always make this adjustment, but we're going to add a layer mask. And if I wanted to take out this Shutterstock.com at the bottom, I can use the eraser. And simply, with the layer mask selected, just click and drag across this name to eliminate it out. So couch-wise, perspective looks a lot better if I start moving over already to the right side, but I want to have it over to the left. So if I want to rotate it, I'm going to hit Command-T, then right-click and hit Flip Horizontal, get it facing the other way. Even if it doesn't fit to the space perfectly, what we want to do is just simply squeeze it down a little bit. I can hold down Shift and squeeze it from the side to pull it inward. This will allow me to have a couch that fits better to the area. And if I wanted a little bit more, again, just squeezing it down. Because I have an angled view, because I can see the side of the couch, I have something that looks more realistic to fitting to a space. So once I'm satisfied with the placement, I can hit Enter to place it. And the final step is looking to add a drop shadow underneath of this object. So I'm going to create a new layer again. I can call it Couch Shadow. Then I'm going to use the Polygon Lasso tool to draw out my shadow based on the 4 legs of the couch. Even though I can't see this back leg, I can kind of assume where it is. I know it's going to be a horizontal direction towards the back end, and then I have to connect back down to the front one that I started. I'm going to fill this in with black, edit fill. Make sure your contents is black. Now it filled. Most important step is to deselect. Control D or Command D. I can move this layer underneath of my couch. Now I can see that it sits very well, but I want to drop or put a Gaussian blur on this. So I'm going to go up to Filter at the top navigation, down to Blur, and Gaussian blur. The 12 might not be enough. I can always push it a little bit higher. I don't want it casting too high, make it look like it's floating or it's not connected. But something like 20 or so will allow me to get a good shadow. Except, again, I do want to do the blend mode. I'm going to go back down to soft light. If I feel like the soft light's not strong enough, again, just duplicate out the layer. I can either right click and duplicate layer, or just click and drag it down to the new layer icon. And now we get that shadow casting sitting underneath of the object. So this is the process of getting into adding in the room. Obviously for our project, we'll get into adding a lot more pieces of furniture, really making it your own, customizing, adding your own style, your own personality. That's the most important part about building out a room. Make it your own. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you again.